Hello and welcome to The Big Picture. It's been 25 years since Dr. Manmohan Singh, as the Finance Minister of India, stood up to present the budget on July 24, 1991, which changed the face of India forever. The economic reforms embarked upon in that budget, leading to economic liberalization, privatization and globalization, led to far-reaching changes. It changed not only the nature of our economy, but also the way we lived forever. It brought in dramatic changes in the next 25 years. India's economy, which was ranked 17th in 1991, now ranks 8th in the world. Poverty, which was 46.1% in 1991, has come down to 21.3% now. Foreign exchange reserves, which was $9.22 billion in 1991, is now $355.56 billion. STD call rates, which was 22 rupees per minute in 1991, is now 1 rupee per minute. The length of national highways, which was 33,700 kilometers, is now over 1 lakh kilometers. Number of computers, which was just 80,000 in 1991, is now 220 million. Life expectancy is improved from 58.4 years to 67.7 years. The number of TV sets in the country, which was 34.3 million, is now 168 million. Rural wages, which was 46 rupees per day, is now 272 rupees per day. The list goes on of the development that has taken place in these last 25 years. However, there are also very disturbing signs of jobless growth, increasing gap between the rich and the poor, and malnourishment among children, and also growth in corruption and crony capitalism. So what has been the benefits and pitfalls of economic reforms and liberalization, and where do we stand today? We will discuss all this with Ajay Dua, former Secretary, Ministry of Industries and Commerce, Government of India, Professor Arun Kumar, Center for Economic Studies and Planning at the JNU, N.R. Bhanumurthy, Member, National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, and Professor Santosh Mehrotra of the Center for Informal Sector and Labour Studies, JNU. Welcome to all of you. Mr. Ajay Dua, in 1991, Dr. Manmohan Singh, incidentally your professor,
Yes, he was.
So when he embarked on this, what were the goals of that when he embarked on that liberalization?
I think those were both short-term as well as long-term. The immediate provocation, if you would recall, was that we had a very bad, we were in a very bad fiscal situation, very bad in terms of our foreign obligations fulfillment problem, and also there was a stagnancy in the growth of the economy itself. I think at the same time, while to get over that, certain things had to be done, including the sizable devaluation of the rupee, which took place in the 2 tranches at that point of time. There was also, I think, a fair amount of thinking which had gone into it for some time in the government on how do we get our organized sector moving. The organized sector, industrial sector, financial sector, trade sector, which I am calling as a formal sector, that all of those were experiencing growth rates which were, I would say, minimal. And I think that was a background in which the so-called liberalization process started. And I would sum these up, club these under 5 heads. One was in the field of industrial licensing, where most products, most lines were delicensed. Second was in the area of trade liberalization, where the whole lot of items in which trade was not allowed, those were removed off the prohibited list or the restricted list, as this to be called. And also, in order to facilitate freer trade, the duties, there used to be duties both on export as well as in import.
Yes.
Those were done away with. And there was, of course, no question at that time of India participating in any FTAs of CEPAs, etc., which was all starting post that. Third, I would put this in the area of, since then, it didn't happen in 91, since then we have seen where our change attitude towards foreign direct investment. It may have happened in tranches, stages over the next 20 years, and it continues even now. Fourth, to my mind, was the changes which were made with respect to financial sector reform.
Yes.
We may have started, we have a lot to do there, but I would by and large put these things which started in these 4 or 5 groupings, and there are many others about which you hinted, which we need to still go on.
Okay. Professor Arun Kumar, one of the major aims of this liberalization process was to create more wealth, create more jobs, and shrink poverty and the gap as much as possible. How much has been, if you look back at these 25 years, as an economist, how satisfied are you?
We need to step back a little. You see, in 1947, when we got independence, the philosophy of all economic policy making and of other social policies was that the individual is not to blame, the collective has to do it. So state was given a very large role and the markets were to follow. That was the philosophy that was there from 1947 up to 1991. In 1991, there was a complete turnaround where now it was said that the individual is to blame and the collective is not to blame. So individual must go to the market. An individual must get things from there, so that's education, so privatization of education, health, so you go to the market, employment generation, etc. So markets became dominant and the public sector retreated. That was the philosophical change, which is what covers what Mr. Dua has pointed out, vis-a-vis industrial policy, vis-a-vis fiscal policies, vis-a-vis your all kinds of trade policies, etc., etc. Now the question is that when you shift to the market, then markets are not good masters. Markets lead to marginalization of those who are at the margins. And therefore, what has happened is that while the growth did not pick up for the first 12 years till 2002, we had achieved a 5.2% rate of growth in the 1980s, and the rate of growth remained at about 5.3% average between 1991 and 2002-2003. It's only from 2003 that we had a 9% rate of growth for 4 years till the financial crisis came. Then the rate of growth dropped. Again, it picked up in 2010, and then again from 2011, it came down. And we are now trying to raise the rate of growth there. So in other words, instability has increased. And as you pointed out, the gap between the rich and the poor has expanded. To give you only one example, as you pointed out, the minimum wage in 1991 was 35 rupees. That has risen to about 165 rupees. But on the other hand, managerial salaries have risen by factors of 100. So for instance, in up to 1992, there was a cap on managing director's salary at 3,12,000. And now you can have 30 crores, etc. So it has risen by almost 1,000 times. So the gap has increased. So similarly, for instance, you see that in agriculture, incomes have not risen very much. But in other sectors, incomes have risen far more. So the gap between agriculture and non-agriculture has increased. Gap between the rich states and poor states, that has taken a little shift since 2007-8. But on the whole, if you compare from 1980, the gap between the rich and the poor states has also increased. So disparities have grown. Instability of the economy has increased, and that's why the economy faces all these ups and downs, etc. So in other words, when we say that poverty has decreased as a result of these new economic policies, we have to be a bit careful, because what has happened is the
numbers show 47.1%,
but
23%.
that is as per a given line, you fix a line. But what has happened is that social minimum necessary consumption has also been rising. For instance, health costs have risen. A Kerala study shows that between 1991 and 1999, the bottom decile cost of health increased by 750%, whereas for the top decile it rose only by 250%. So because of the massive environmental pollution that is taking place, the massive health issues plus privatization, so health costs have risen. Education costs have risen as far as the poor and others are concerned. So if you net all that out, then it's not very clear that the number of people below the poverty line that has changed very dramatically. And that's why many people argue that actually poverty has not been affected. Inequality definitely has increased, but poverty, whether it has declined at the same level or not, is not very clear.
It's still a matter of contention. Bhanumurthy, this entire dilemma which has happened in this country, visibly we have seen changes which have taken place. Our own lives have changed dramatically in these last 25 years. The way we do everything has changed. And India has also, in the Committee of Nations, we have grown from 17 to number 8, and we are seen as the fastest developing country in the world and all that. But still, why has this gap between the rich and poor continues to grow?
Well, I think it all depends on the kind of sectors that has been focused in the reform period. As we know very well, we have seen a skewness in the overall growth process in the post-1991, particularly the service sector growing much faster than many of the sectors, which could have led to a lot of inequality, as Professor Arun Kumar pointed out. But in my view, I think...
sorry to intervene.
Yeah.
The growth of the middle class,
Yeah.
that has also been one of the major factors in these 25 years.
Yeah, I think these are all basically outcomes of all the growth process. I mean, the service sector is one of the driving force for rise of middle class also. I mean, there are no other sectors which is growing as fast as service sector. I mean, agriculture is, I mean, we know that it's still growing at less than 2% and the industry is growing at, we know the shares are coming down. So overall, if you look at the middle class growing is also because of the rise in the service sector shares. So I think if you look at that way, yes, there is a rise in the inequality in the post-reform period, but we have seen the overall improvement in the quality of life of each and every person in the society. But I think when you want to compare these reforms, we should also have a different perspective. I think, from 90s onwards, the globalization is not limited to India alone. It's a globalization is part of the world growth process. If you compare India's growth and development from 90s to now with other countries, maybe we would have done much better in the growth. But I think in terms of the social sector, we are very, very far from other countries, even if you compare with emerging market economies like...
Far means far ahead or far behind?
Far behind.
Yes.
Far behind. In terms of China, or if you look at any of the East Asian countries, I think we need to really look at economic reforms from different metrics. One is the growth, the other one is the social sector indicators. For that, we have a very good framework in Millennium Development Goals, which also started from 1990. So if you see the progress in these goals, India stands very, very below compared to many countries. I think we need to look at...
Including Bangladesh?
Yeah, in that sense, some parameters. So in that sense, if you look at growth, yes, we have done well, but in terms of social sector development, we are still very, very far behind most of the countries.
And why is this? Santosh Mehrotra, why is this? But as an economist, where will you put your finger on to what Banamurthy talks about?
The reason for the rise in inequality is that in 1991, the vast majority of the poor in our country had very low levels of education, very low levels of health. And unfortunately, they were simply not in a position to take advantage of the market-friendly policies and the growth in jobs that happened. So that was a foundational difference between India on the one hand and China on the other when China began its reforms in 1979. In China, the vast majority were literate, they had access to good health services, there was equality of ownership of land and so on. And none of these three things actually were in place in 1991. So this is a very, very important reason why it was inevitable that inequality was going to grow. Having said that, Girish, it's important to recognize that for the first time in the history of India, and I'm talk about poverty, because you've repeatedly talked about the decline in the incidence of poverty, meaning the share of population below the poverty line.
Right.
Sort of between 1991 and now. Now, the equally important, I think, is how many poor people were there, the absolute number of the poor. You know, never in the history of India between 1973 and 1993 had there been an absolute decline in the numbers of the poor. By the Lakdawala poverty line, for the first time in India's independent history, there was an absolute decline in the numbers of the poor between 93 and 2004-05, and since then that really accelerated. Although between 93 and 2004, the decline in the absolute numbers was merely 20 million by the Lakdawala poverty line. After growth really seriously picked up post 2003-04, there was a dramatic decline in the absolute numbers of the poor by the new Tendulkar poverty line of 140 million. So there are many achievements also.
Right.
Although there are downsides which I think for the future of India are absolutely critical, and I'm sure jobs is one of them, and jobs have not grown rapidly enough, and that's an additional reason why inequality has increased.
Okay. Mr. Dua, you know, when people are talking about market-friendly policies not being taken advantage of, what Santosh says, so the policy makers at that time, when the liberalization process started, were not aware of this or didn't know how to approach this problem? How to ensure that people could take advantage of the market-friendly policies?
I think it was both. But before I see it may be a sheer coincidence that the areas where liberalization has not taken place, if you look at it in the sense which it has taken place in the formal sector, to my mind comes the agriculture sector. Along with that, I would put the labor sector. There hasn't been much of reform in education, health, and other social issues which we are talking about.
Except privatization.
Yeah, privatization by itself was not the cure. You may have allowed private sector to come into infrastructure. You allowed private sector to come into social sector. But has everybody been able to access those? That is where the issue of, when you raise this issue about market friendly and others, market is friendly is for the people who can access it, who can afford it. So here we saw that, the areas which I just mentioned, a few of those as illustrations, happen to be maybe a sheer coincidence, largely a responsibility of the state governments. At best, some may be in the concurrent list. So the message which comes to, the import of this is, we've probably not had the state sectors, and where the responsibility is joint, we need to look at all those issues if we really want to have the benefit of the 4 or 5 sets of reforms which have taken place, which probably are the only ones which we keep on working on. FDI refining goes on, and there's no end to it. But we haven't really begun our structural reforms which are required in the other sectors, largely within the purview of the states.
Yes, Professor.
I'd like to add to this. You see, your investment pattern and your choice of technology is very important for employment generation. What has happened is that of late, because now the public sector is in retreat, the private sector has gone ahead, plus private sector says there's globalization, we have to face the international competition, so they've gone for more advanced technology. Now, what the implication is, it's capital intensive rather than labor intensive.
Right.
So 80% of your investment is going to the organized sector, but organized private sector employment has increased only from 7.5 million in 1991 to 9.5 million, whereas the workforce has increased from 250 million then to 450 million. So the balance of the 198 million have actually had to go into the unorganized sector. Now, in agriculture, the investment is only 3%. Okay. Now, for 50% of the...
Why has it that the entire process of liberalization not affected agriculture at all?
Because investment is very low. Investment is very low. As I said, for 50% of the population which is in agriculture, only you have 3% investment. And that too is going into the modern sector, which is labor displacing. So you have mechanization, so you have farm implements, and you have tractorization and other things. So agriculture is not generating employment, okay? And in the formal sector where 80% is going in, that's not generating employment. So where do you go? It's residual employment. So what is happening is, in the large unorganized sector, in the services sector, in the industrial sector, etc., people are going at very low wages, okay? That's one.
And
Second
no protection at all.
No protection. So 94% of the employment is in the unorganized sector, only 6% of the employment is in the organized sector, and 94% is in the unorganized sector. Second is skill levels. Education levels are so low that, as ACER reports show, in the last 10 years the ACER reports are coming, they're showing that children in the 8th class cannot read 3rd class textbook. They cannot do 3rd class mathematics. So these 50% children who A, drop out, and B, do not have any skills, are going to remain poor for the next 50 years because they cannot do any skilled jobs. So that is the other reason why you do not have this inequality reducing, and inequality is increasing, because these people can neither do any entrepreneurial job, nor can they do any skilled jobs, and they will remain stuck in agriculture or in very low paid service sector jobs, like they migrate to cities and they do head load work, or they do push rickshaws or things like that. Now those jobs are also going to go out over a period of of time, so they'll remain very poor. So this investment pattern, the choice of technology that we have, plus the fact that our health sector is affected badly as a result of public sector health cost not rising, or rather public sector investment in health not rising, and education sector where we have very poor standards of education. So skills are not being developed and those people cannot get skilled jobs.
Okay, Bhanumurthy, you know, why, while approaching these kind of problems, you know, at the same time, the kind of investments which are being made, which is ensuring that dollar billionaires have gone up by, you know,
Fourth largest
number of dollar billionaires in the world in India. You know, why, again, where has been the problem as far as policies are concerned?
No, I think if you look at the kind of sectors which Professor Arun Kumar and Dr. Dua spoken, I think all these sectors come under the purview of the state government. The reason why we are seeing this kind of inequality in these kind of sectors, and not necessarily that all states are doing bad in terms of education or agriculture. Some states are doing better than other. The reason is, I think some of the states are really lag behind in terms of coming as part of the reform process. There are some of the best practices some states have already adopted, like for example Gujarat or Tamil Nadu for that matter, Kerala, Andhra Pradesh. So they all try to adopt some of the best practices.
Even a state like Madhya Pradesh has done very well in agriculture.
In fact, I should tell you that Madhya Pradesh for the past 5 years, they are growing, the agriculture sector is growing at double digit.
Exactly.
I've been doing a lot of work on Madhya Pradesh of late. So if you look at it, the kind of
So the growth has not been uniform.
The growth is not being uniform largely because some of the states...
Do you attribute it to lack of political will?
Yeah, I think a lack of political will to some extent at the state government level.
That's right.
Otherwise, we do have best practices available where you can adopt it. I think the best example for that is Madhya Pradesh, as you rightly pointed out. They came out very late into this process and they are doing very good in terms of agriculture sector. So in a sense, my view is that I think the overall implementation, although we do have good policies, the implementations, all these things should be happening at the state level. I may go at a little more at the district level to implement particularly the social sector programs. We do have policies at the macro level, but the implementation needs to be looked at the district level in the states.
Santosh? Santosh, and as far as the jobs are concerned, where did it go wrong? Where did the policies go wrong since the liberalization process started? Or as you said, I think you made a remark that this was bound to happen. Was it bound to happen? This kind of jobless growth?
Well, it could have been corrected early on rapidly if we had adopted the right policies. And unfortunately, I think the previous speakers have repeatedly mentioned the slow growth of agriculture. You see, today, 25 years after the economic reforms began, we have a situation where half the labor force, half the workforce is still in agriculture. This is unacceptable. Now, one important reason why this happened is because never in the history of India, including post-economic reforms, has the agriculture sector shown growth higher than 3.2%. Now, this is half of what East Asian countries achieved on average, especially in China. Let's recall that China's economic reforms began with agriculture. The first decade was pretty much spent reforming agriculture and gaining the fruits of that. Industrial reforms began only towards the end of the 80s, after almost a decade of the agriculture reforms. We did it the opposite way. And in respect of industry, there was a catastrophic failure which still survives, and which is the following. There was among policymakers an illusion that domestic liberalization and external opening up was going to lead suddenly to industrial growth. Well, it didn't. What in fact happened was premature deindustrialization, because you very rapidly reduced the tariffs, so that such industry which had never been exposed to international markets earlier got wiped out. So therefore, what is the implication? The implication today is that one, there has to be much greater concern for agriculture. I'm not going into the details there than there has been ever in the history of our country, especially since economic reforms. And second, the country needs an industrial policy. Again, East Asia shows us the way, that the way they moved forward was through an industrial policy focusing on employing workers. The labor-intensive industries received very significant support. Unfortunately, that didn't happen in our country. That's why you are continuing to see jobless growth. So you have a following situation, and I'll finish with this.
Yes.
That the share of manufacturing in GDP was barely 15% in 1991. In 2014, it is still 15%. Unacceptable. And the share of manufacturing in employment has also was only about 11% then, and is barely 12.8% now. So it's barely grown again. This is not the way China moved forward, or the East Asians became miracle economies.
Okay, Mr. Dua, we have by and large tackled what the problem is, but are we on the right track? What should be done to be on the right track?
I think we are at a stage, as has been pointed out, that everybody probably has shared that point of view, that the time has come, if we want to take the full benefit of the reforms which were initiated in the 90s in the organized sector led by industry, the financial sector and other kind of things, those will become sustainable and deepen only when you take the reforms which are urgently required in other sectors of the economy, particularly those which impact the rural areas and the social sector, which would probably be impacting as much the urban areas as well. Otherwise, we are going to be seeing a whole lot of unrealized gains of the economic reforms of the formal sector, industrial sector, etc. So I dare say what we should now be doing is 10 years, a decade of focused reforms on the social sector and the rural sector. The rest of the economy could, I'm not saying ignore it, but the attention both of the federal government as well as the state governments has to be on this thing rather than others.
Kumar.
Yeah, as I started by saying...
Continuing what he said.
So there's a philosophical change that took place in 1991 where we now focus on the market. So we've shifted too much in the favor of market away from state.
So the balance needs to be restored.
The balance needs to be restored because the poor people in this country cannot depend on the market. That's not what caters to them. So therefore, it has to be a holistic change. It cannot be that we change only in agriculture or only in the rural sector or in this, because after all, resources are limited. And you have to allocate those resources in such a way that you don't make some sectors gain and some sectors suffer. So emphasis on agriculture has to be increased, emphasis on employment generation has to be increased, but that will only happen when the investment pattern changes, when the choice of technology changes.
Okay.
So therefore, a total view is required.
No, apart from those things, as Professor Santosh Meheradra pointed out, now if you want to revive the manufacturing sector, I think we need to really look at some of the reforms which actually affects that particular sector. And we know very well what are those factors. One is that labor reform that we talk about, land issues which we are not able to tackle further, and then the financial market reforms. And right now the manufacturing is not expanding because there is no credit availability. I think the banking sector reforms.
Sorry if I might say, the jobs are not going to get created if you do the labor reforms which the industry is asking for.
Exactly. That's only going to bring down
bring it down.
If the manufacturing sector expand, if the share of manufacturing goes up.
Pardon my saying is, today the manufacturing sector is not expanding because there is a lack of demand from the rural areas.
Exactly. Anyway,
if the demand gets revived,
each one of these are separate discussions which we will have, but overall, the fact is that economic sector, economic reforms, liberalization has helped a lot of people, but has also not helped a whole lot of other people in this country. How these lot which have not been helped can be helped is the biggest challenge which the government will face in the coming years and months and years. Thanks to all my guests. Please keep watching. We come back with Andharish in the Big Picture same time tomorrow.